President clearly shaken, I think one can say, confirming what we think we all knew, which was that 2 aircraft in an act of terrorism crashed into the Twin Trade Towers. Nobody was quite certain about the first one at the very outset, but the President absolutely, having talked to the Vice President, the Governor of New York, the Director of the FBI, now believing and confirming that we have 2 terrorist attacks on the World Trade Center, and the President saying the 2 things which a President must say at a moment like this: terrorism will not stand, which is an important thing for him to say, but not always necessarily effective, and God bless the victims and their families. John Miller, what are you picking up on the police radio?
There was a bit of a stir a moment ago because LaGuardia Tower reported urgently that there was another aircraft moving fast in the no-fly zone. Now they've contacted that aircraft and they say it's a military aircraft that's rushed to the scene to enforce the no-fly zone and literally be a presence in the area in case there is another plane headed for the building, so that there'll be some at least armed aircraft up to confront it.
Just think for a second, John, how you have drawn an extraordinary parallel. We think of no-fly zones as being in southern
Iraq
and northern Iraq, where the Iraqis are not allowed to fly, and if they do fly, are going to be shot down. Now we have a no-fly zone all around the lower part of New York City, and perhaps on the northern area too. All of the areas, airports closed down, and armed American aircraft in the air to shoot down anybody else who wants to take a shot at the place.
I mean, those are the reports that are coming across the radio now, and if they're true, it's quite incredible and certainly unprecedented.
Well, it would also suggest, as best you can tell, looking at it from this very sort of antiseptic environment that we are all in our newsrooms, is that the reaction has been fairly quick. New York City has an Office of Emergency Management. It's over here on the west side. It's a great bunker. Which the city,
ironically, it's located in the World Trade Center complex, although not in the Twin Towers.
Just
right next door,
north of the Trade Towers,
right.
in the World Trade Center, in the other northern World Trade Center there. And on an occasion like this is not one they absolutely anticipate when they get going. They're talking very concerned with chemical and biological warfare. They've got extensive plans about that, which they very often demonstrate to the press. I'm going to interrupt myself and everybody else for a second because one of our senior producers, Mark Obenhaus, is on the phone, and he saw the incident. Mark, you hear me?
I do indeed, Peter.
Go ahead.
Well, I was leaving my house to go to work, and I walked down the street to go to the subway. I was at the corner of Franklin and West Broadway, and as I was approaching the subway, the tremendous roar went over my head, and I looked up immediately, and it was a plane, and much lower than I've ever seen a plane in Lower Manhattan. And it was a large plane. I couldn't identify it as anything specific except that it was a commercial jet, certainly. And then my eyes followed it because this is approximately 15 blocks from the World Trade Center, and it just slammed right into it and was completely engulfed by the building. It was extraordinary. No wings flew off, nothing like that. It just went directly in, creating this sort of cavern-like hole, and suddenly then big flames started protruding from it, and then of course smoke, and then debris started just catapulting. And of course the area that we're in, there's a great deal of foot traffic, and people are just approaching and beginning to just gasp at just the sight of the building itself. Even if they hadn't seen it, the actual incident, the actual impact, just the sight of this huge building engulfed in flame with this massive cavernous hole in the side of it. And we stood there, I can't tell you the amount of time, I would estimate about 15 minutes. And of course there's all kinds of services coming down, fire department and so forth. And then suddenly from my vantage point, which would be north of the building, the far tower suddenly explodes in flames. Yet again, a similar kind of an event. And I now see, I've run down the street to my home where I have the television on, and I saw that too was another airplane. From our vantage point, you couldn't tell what exactly it was that hit the second tower, but it was a similar, seemingly almost like bomb blast, and with flames and debris protruding wildly from the building.
Mark, let me ask you a couple of more specific questions. You now confirm for us, I think, that it was the first attack on the tower that you saw.
Yes.
What direction was the aircraft coming from?
It was coming from the north.
It was coming from the north down over Manhattan itself?
Yes. It would have been flying roughly over the west side. I'm on, as I say, West Broadway, which is probably a quarter mile from the river. So it was on a direct path north, from the north, into the north tower.
Do you remember whether it had 2 engines, 3 engines, or 4 engines?
I do not. It was very quick. It struck me, the profile, the body of the plane was of such scale that I immediately identified it as a commercial jet. It happened so quickly I couldn't tell whether it had windows on the side or what. It could very well have been some sort of a transport plane, but it was a large plane. As opposed to occasionally down here you do see smaller prop planes or smaller aviation stuff that flies around here, sometimes doing movies and things like that. But in all my years down here, and I've lived down here for about 20 years within walking distance easily of the building, I've never heard anything like this, and that's why I just immediately glanced up and just followed the track of this sound and this huge plane that was swooping over my head.
Could you see any markings on it whatsoever?
No, I did not. It was too quick. I can't give you any kind of identifying help on what it was.
Do you remember what color it was?
My impression was that it had a tan coloration to it. However, the sun, it was very low in the horizon, and I think kind of orange. It may have been simply the color of the sun reflecting off a silver exterior. I really am not sure of that.
Okay, Mark. Anything else? What's the mood in the environment down there at the moment? As if it's not hard to imagine.
And everyone who glimpses it close up, it's quite different seeing it from the ground than on these television pictures that I'm now looking at, because it's close to you and you see what the impact must have been like, and you see the kind of devastation that has incurred by the buildings, and it's just frightening is perhaps even too mild a word.
Okay.
It's absolutely just a horrible sight. It reminds you of the worst kind of effects in movies that you're reassured watching a movie that it's an effect, but this is not.
Well, Mark, you and I were supposed to have a meeting not long from now. We'd prefer you to go and work the story if you would, and call us back as soon as you can.
I will indeed.
Many thanks. Mark Obenhaus, one of our senior producers on the phone, who saw the incident, describes it as a large plane, not sure what the color was, not sure the number of engines it had, which in his mind, he's a very experienced reporter, reflects the speed and surprise with which this aircraft, this is the first one we're talking